Let's get going. So, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're at in this world. Um, Thank you for making your way here. We really appreciate it. I'm welcoming you to this morning's webinar, or at least morning where I'm at. Today, we'll be talking about cyber insurance and how it compares to operational warranties, what's the differences, and how important is your coverage. So, we have two wonderful guests here. Before we get to introducing them, I do want to highlight that this webinar is being recorded, so you can come back at your leisure and revisit anything that's being said. We'll probably be around 45 minutes today. We'll keep 30 minutes for interviewing and chit-chatting, and then another 15 minutes for a Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them at any time, and I'll make sure to get to them towards the end of the webinar here so Tim and Dave can go ahead and answer them. But enough of me, enough of the talk. Let's get to Tim and Dave, our important guests today. So for one, we have Tim Zielman here from HSB. He is Vice President and Global Product Owner for Cyber and Privacy Insurance. So he's an expert in the topics we'll be talking about today. Very excited to have you here, Tim. Thank you for your time. And then we also have Dave Cullen, Strategic Advisor, Field CTO, bunch of different roles, a lot of history in cybersecurity, especially in the OT field. Glad to have you here and looking forward to some good discussions here. So without further ado, I do have some questions here that I'd like to get covered today and just have sort of an easygoing discussion here between the two of you. So Tim, I'll just put you on the spot here, get things going. So maybe you can explain to me and our audience this morning what key differences are between cyber insurance and operational performance warranties, because warranties and insurance, they kind of do the same thing, but do they really? Maybe you can shine a light on that.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a good way to start because there definitely are some similarities, which is I think why it's somewhat confusing. Both insurance policies and operational warranties are contracts, and they're both fundamentally designed to kind of transfer some sort of risk from the recipient, the customer, to another party, whether it be a service provider like OTORIO in the case of an operational warranty, or an insurance company like HSB in the case of an insurance policy. But beyond those sort of basic similarities, there are many differences. Some of them are regulatory. So insurance is a specialized, highly regulated area of business and risk transfer, whereas warranties fall more into kind of a category of sort of general business operations, where a provider of a product or a service is also providing a bit of a promise in terms of for future risks along with its product or service. Largely driven by those regulatory requirements to make sure that these things are pretty separate from each other. There are some bigger picture sort of practical implications for the differences between those two kinds of contracts. One is that for operational warranties, the promise, kind of that risk transfer piece, has to be pretty tightly tied to the product or service that the service provider is providing, and that's the case with the OTORIO operational warranty. It's very closely tied to the work that OTORIO does, whereas an insurance product can be much broader and is kind of more of a general risk transfer. It doesn't need to be any services or products provided, so it doesn't need to tightly follow any provision of services or products. It can provide a broad promise of risk transfer, of risk protection in a particular area of risk, like cyber, for example. So what we get from a warranty perspective is narrower in scope, more tightly tied to a service provider. And with insurance, you get a much broader sort of coverage in a particular subject matter area. Going along with that too, you get some things where deductibles, sometimes large deductibles, are much more of a thing in insurance than they are in operational warranties, and limits can be quite different as well. In insurance coverages, you are allowed to provide much higher limits of coverage, whereas operational warranties are relatively modest in comparison.
Interesting. Yeah, that's actually a good way of putting it, that insurance kind of cover the wider picture there than compared to warranties.
Certainly the idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Dave, anything to add to that?
Well, that was a very in-depth description, and I definitely can't even describe it that well. But no, I think to touch on what Tim said, and just to use, I mean, the term risk was used a lot, but if I look at the benefit as well as to where is it more tangible, and realizing that with the performance warranty, you have an opportunity for very, what I would say, prescriptive conditions to receive that guarantee or that warranty, right? So it allows us to get to a little more, quote unquote, in the weeds as to, okay, do this, this, and this, and you receive this benefit. Where insurance much more broad because it needs to be based on risk profile. And I'm sure we're going to cover off today just where gaps might emerge, or kind of some of the challenges in cyber and in operational technology right now. But it really is, more broad in its coverage, and tends to be a little less prescriptive, right? So if we're looking for targeted protection, and where we can, quote unquote, move the needle in improving a system, I think, and we can expand it out in today's session. That's where a performance guarantee and warranty can really be an enabler to some very prescriptive technical benefit, right?
Very true
Yeah,
indeed.
I think that's a great point, because the operational warranty is going to be provided by a service provider that you have a service relationship with. Their knowledge of the risk and their knowledge of the risks that that particular customer are likely to be far different than an insurance company that's probably just going to be asking, a handful of questions on an application.
Very true. So now that we kind of looked at how operational warranties and cybersecurity insurance, or insurance in general, can be different, that kind of brings me to the question: how can they be complement to each other? Is there a way to kind of make them work together? Is there any benefits in that? Tim, any
Yeah.
insights?
I think there's tremendous benefit. From an insurance perspective, we think of ourselves as kind of picking up more or less residual risk. So we're hoping that our customers, our insureds, are doing the right things to protect themselves. So they're not saying, well, I've got an insurance policy, I don't need to worry about my cyber risk. We want them to be doing, and most companies do, because they don't want to have a loss even if they have an insurance policy. We want them to be doing the stuff that they should be doing to understand and manage and mitigate their cybersecurity risk. And insurance is kind of there for the residual stuff, that the risks that you can't get rid of, even if you're doing your best to understand it and mitigate your own risks, and also pick up any accidents or mistakes or gaps that are unintended but happen in the real world. So I would say that's generally, like, kind of in terms of a framework, how they complement each other. So, a service provider like OTORIO and the operational warranty that they provide is part of that sort of part one, which is business owners, business operators doing their due diligence, their best to be competent in understanding and passing along or getting rid of as many risks as they can. And they do that through understanding their assets. They do that through security technologies to try to reduce their risk as much as possible. And the operational warranty plays a role in that as well. Again, tied very tightly to the work that OTORIO does in identifying and mitigating risk. And then you can think of the insurance policy as sitting then on top of that and picking up residual risk that's impossible to get rid of, that exists anyway, or perhaps in the case of a cyber insurance policy, again going back to the first point that we talked about, and the difference is perhaps picking up risk that is outside the scope of a service provided from an OTORIO or that operational warranty that goes along with those services. So I think of it as kind of a, active risk identification and mitigation, maybe kind of a small umbrella sitting over an insured from a service and an operational warranty perspective, and then a big umbrella sitting over on top of that, as an insurance company, picking up all that risk that perhaps it hasn't been mitigated or can't be mitigated at the operational level.
Yeah, I think, and that kind of dovetails to also let's call it the persona, right? Of within the organization, what do these products or who are they relevant to, right? And if I look at, insurance, we're typically dealing with, a risk officer or somebody in finance. Various different departments might be the owner of the insurance products and mandates within the organization, right? And it's, if I look at cyber insurance, also kind of feeds up into general liability and business operations and all of those things that are directly tied to enterprise risk management, right? And yet we have a great opportunity, I think, with the warranty to engage the asset owner, to get really down in the environment, to be prescriptive with the asset owner, to say, here, you do this, and this, and you receive this benefit. And we're going to help you do that. And these are the kind of parameters, right? Rather than, I'm not being negative about insurance, but it is a very general kind of risk profile. Like you said, Tim, it's a questionnaire, and you don't really know the tests and limits of your insurance until you have to make a claim, right? Whereas I think that, looking at the performance guarantee, the warranty, is it can be very relevant to just day-to-day work or actual tangible improvement of a system, and work directly with the expert on that system, the asset owner, right? The person who operates that system. Hey, if we do this, our security profile is better, and we receive this guarantee, that should take away a lot of the barriers, right? So I think it's a great opportunity for the organization to connect these kind of topics and discussions, and involve, sort of extends the table a little bit, right? To have an asset owner who doesn't really have awareness of enterprise risk, to be able to at least see how they can influence it, right? And it's something in the field we don't see enough of, where they don't see, well, if I do these things, it just feels like it's a checklist of things that you want me to do for security. Well, no, there is actual performance and operations benefit to this. Being able to use these products to create alignment and change messaging internally, while not so tangible, it's a bit of a nebulous concept, has a lot of power when done right. And we've seen it really create benefit in organizations that kind of take this different approach, right?
Yeah, I love the idea too that you raised of thinking about the people that deal with these two areas of service and risk transfer. That your insurance buyers typically, not you think about your cyber insurance buyer. That's the same person, probably maybe a risk management officer, something like that, who's thinking about all of the insurance coverage, property, liability for the organization. So they're thinking about risk at an institutional level, whereas you have particular kind of subject matter experts or owners of particular portions of the business, whether it's a facility manager or maybe your cybersecurity team for traditional IT risks, or your facilities teams for property risks. They're really the experts in their particular area, and they're trying to do that risk mitigation work, on their own or with outside third parties in their particular areas of responsibility.
And Dave, you're already kind of going in the direction of the next question I had here, so great leeway here. And you're already touching on challenges a little bit, how different stakeholders look at insurance and warranties differently here. So that, of course, brings certain challenges. So what do you see organizations facing in mainstream challenges when it comes in obtaining comprehensive cyber insurance?
Yeah, so when we talk just generally cyber insurance, we have to realize that the risk profile that insurers and have to deal with, like the order of magnitude in just general cyber insurance and how many ifs, ands, and buts they need to cover off. I'm not an insurance expert, but it's a significant range of risk profile, and yet you need to bring it into a product that you can sell to a customer. And so I think what I've seen that breed, and just from my experience more in the field, is that risk profile adjusts year over year, right? And so the challenge I see is there'll be that 1 year simply because the risk profile has shifted for whether it's a particular insurance provider or the market in general. Now there's new requirements coming in that are being kind of brought to you through your questionnaire, meaning you answered no to this. Now we need you to fill out this separate document or whatever, right? So with that risk profile being dynamic, I think it provides a lot of challenges when we talk the OT environment that is traditionally static, and you don't have this rate of change that's accelerated. You don't really adapt quickly because that in its own can create new risk, right? But the challenge is now we're dealing with I see time and time again, we have these conversations where an organization might engage with us because they can't get insured or their insurability is in doubt for cyber. And not that I have a crystal ball, and again, Tim is probably the expert here, but how long until cyber kind of segues into loss of business as well because of a cyber event? Would that be excluded if your production is down? Are you going to be able to recover anything on lost production time? I think there's a lot of these challenges are obviously at macro level and are difficult to predict and deal with. But so then coming back to my point is, year over year, you don't necessarily know what to expect. And I think when we talk OT, this is actually quite difficult in practice.
Yeah, if I could just kind of add on a little bit, I think from my
Sure.
perspective, most buyers of insurance, kind of the challenges that the two primary challenges they face, one is insurability, as Dave said, like can they get a cyber insurance, number one, and number two, if they can qualify, a price is the second one. Often the price is well, I know prohibitive maybe an exaggeration, but it often is more than insureds are expecting to pay. And I think a partnership with a company like OTORIO can help on both sides. When as an insurance company, when you're looking at an applicant for cyber insurance, you may be looking at specific items, but you're trying to get an overall picture of whether this company has their act together when it comes to their approach to cyber insurance. And the idea that a particular business has engaged a specialist to help it understand its operational technology and mitigate the risks in that area, and that specialist has followed up with a operational warranty that in fact takes at least a small slice of the risk that the insurance policy might also take, I think is going to help in both of those areas. It's going to show that the applicant for insurance really does in fact have their act together, and if they're doing this on their operational technology side, they probably have their act together on their IT side as well, and then it's going to factor in, because at least a segment of that kind of specialized OT risk that the cyber insurer might be taking on is already been well mitigated by another vendor. So I think a relationship like this is going to help with both of those challenges, both the insurability challenge and likely the pricing challenge.
So when you say pricing challenges, then that of course brings up the question of combining cybersecurity insurance and operational warranties can lead to cost savings for organizations. And I'll just keep it with you there, Tim.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's very follows on directly from what Dave and I were just talking about. There are the kind of the specific thing that some of that risk that's going to be taken by that big umbrella, the kind of the residual risk taken by the cyber insurance coverage has already been not only examined and dealt with from a mitigation perspective because of the OTORIO OT services, but also picked up by the operational warranty. So there's a little bit of that risk where the cyber insurance provider has a little bit of a buffer, a little bit of a cushion, because there's another party in the middle who's taken on some of that risk, and that is going to, I think that's going to, for an underwriter who knows what they're doing, that's going to factor in on the pricing for the policy at the end of the day.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I've seen that trend where, I think it's a comment I already made, is you started by, if I think of a cyber insurance questionnaire, and it was first asked, do you have backups? That was what it used to be asked, and say yes, no. And now it's, you have backups? Yes. Okay, are they immutable and stored off site in a separate location? Yeah, it's just this hierarchy of questions, right? And so, and those, your answers directly impact costs there and risk profile. And so I look at this kind of question of cost savings from a couple of perspectives, because when we talk OT, what can often happen is let's call it a deer in the headlights effect, is that, okay, we know we have risk and we know we can improve the risk profile, but where do we start? How do we engage? How do we do it without introducing new risks to the environment? And oftentimes that's where things get tripped up, is we feel like, okay, if I need to adopt this technology or make this configuration change or make these updates, well, I might be introducing new risks to the environment. This is where I think a performance guarantee, the warranty, really helps to remove barriers to action, which is sad to say, but we need to be careful in these environments. Safety, reliability, productivity, fundamentally important. So the challenge is when we need to start addressing risk, oftentimes we can't address it fast enough, right? And so to me, cost savings can come in by being able to tackle your high risk deficiencies or what have you quicker, right? Being able to do that with more confidence because it's backed by that warranty, and you have kind of that assurance to go with the insurance, right? And then the other perspective I have is, what is the cost of doing nothing these days, right? I think the threat landscape and everything has become too complex that anybody who's involved in operations or whatnot, they're going to have some awareness of cybersecurity. They might not know how it all plays out or what have you, but what is the cost of doing nothing? And I think that we need to ask that question consistently. If we don't invest, what are potential outcomes? What is the threat model? What are the attack vectors? Where am I exposed, right? And if we're not seeking out those answers, I think that really is going to generate very real risk, perhaps an incident or what have you. But it's scary, and we need to be having more of these discussions about how do we confidently and safely address risk in these environments. And again, I think we've seen that the performance warranty is very, very effective in helping remove a lot of those barriers.
So, Dave, when you say it's important to understand risk and evaluating the cost of doing nothing, that of course already just having that mindset of analyzing what is the cost of doing nothing already takes thought and some investment, because usually the cost of doing nothing will take you by surprise because you don't even put any thought into that. So how does the OTORIO risk assessment help identify and mitigate cyber risks when it comes to that, just to get a clearer picture, I guess?
Yeah, at a very practical level, the focus is on very, very deep visibility, and that visibility isn't just knowing what your assets are or your vulnerabilities are. It's knowing the potential impact on your operations, having the context of how things work, So really how things are interrelated and operate in the environment, and what the potential business impacts are, or what the potential impacts to the business are, right? And I mean, just as a quick segue, this is a lot of work, and if you think of HSB and their history and where they came from, this is right along that the mission of understanding the environment at a much deeper level, right? And so this is why the HSB OTORIO partnership is so exciting, is because we have that mutual desire to really have a much deeper understanding of the. Beyond that, what we've seen emerge as there's been relative kind of maturity, our platform starts to be able to provide what we call exposure management, right? Being able to see where are my gaps in configuration or my security controls, such that I can see where attack vectors are, where my threats may come from, and I can see that proactively. I don't have to wait for something to happen to me to know I have a gap or have a problem, right? Or a misconfiguration or a vulnerability. We can start to identify that proactively, so you can focus on prevention, right? And really bring all of that into an analytical view, a risk-based view, to drive business decisions.
And I suspect that proactive view, looking at possible exposure or indicators of exposure, is just so much more valuable than looking at indicators of compromise in that space.
Certainly easier, as counterintuitive as that sounds, but think about it. If a threat gets into your critical environment and has taken hold, it is very difficult to eradicate, and your response activities are much different. They're much costlier, and that circles cyber insurance in that, will you have enough coverage? Because it will be a much more complex incident response engagement at that point, right? Mm-hmm. So that's our goal. We're trying to shift to a proactive mindset that, while a lot of the concepts are simple, I would never say that it's easy, right? But I think this is how we need to approach our most critical environments.
And Dave hit the nail on the head with HSB's attitude towards insurance in terms of understanding the risk and preventing where possible instead of just providing insurance. The full name of our company involves the words inspection and insurance, and people at HSB like to point out that inspection comes before insurance in our name and also in our philosophy. From the beginning of the company, it started out with worrying about boilers, but shortly thereafter, we focused on equipment risks of all kinds, and it's very much driven partnerships like the one we have with OTORIO, is that the real emphasis that we place on not only insuring a risk but preventing it and trying to keep it from happening in the first place, which is obviously better for everybody.
Absolutely, fully agree. And before I go on here, I just want to remind our attendees here that the Q&A is open, so feel free to post questions. So we can cover them at the end here. But back to our discussion right here. So we've done a lot of talking now, a lot about the theory and how things work together, but what are some actual real world examples here of how insurance and warranties work together to kind of protect against cyber threats? Who wants to go first?
I'll take that one, Shannon, because I can think of a recent example where you have different personas again in the organization. So in this case, someone at the managerial level realized perhaps we have emerging risk or risk that we haven't dealt with on the plant floor, but struggling to get buy-in to start really kind of looking into that a bit deeper, right? So it's a dynamic we often see where IT has that security awareness, a little more kind of background and experience with risk, because cyber insurance has been much more tangible in IT for a while. And now they start to see, well, we think that we need to address more in OT, which I give them credit. That's very, it's proactive. That's the type of conversation that should be had. But past history, IT has come into OT, it's tipped machine over, or it's created some problems because the tools they ran were IT tools. And, and the project kind of stalled before it started because of the risk it introduced and actually taking down production. So we were able to use the partnership with HSB and the performance warranty as kind of a way to facilitate the collaboration, actually, to take away the fears, not fully eliminate, but really reduce the fears that the folks on the plant floor, the plant manager had, because they simply had a bad experience. And it's easy for us to discount that. And we talk a lot about this in the OT security space, about this IT-OT dynamic and the relationship and the collaboration, maybe or the lack thereof. But what are we doing to find tangible ways to address it? And this actually proved to be quite effective. And that really, if I'm honest, that opened my eyes to the power of the kind of the performance warranty, and using it in kind of a different way to be able to handle an objection and get to the true mission, which is to reduce risk.
Nice. That's some really good insight there. All right. So, Tim, any closing words on that before we move on to the Q&A?
No, I think that was a great example, and I struggle to come up with anything better. So I appreciate Dave providing that particular example.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. So moving over to our Q&A, and again, please keep the questions coming. We do have a few right here. So the first question we do have here is, how do insurance providers assess cyber risks and determine coverage for their clients?
Yeah, and we touched a little bit on this, but I'll talk about it a bit more. It certainly depends on the size of the risk. So a small company is going to get assessed differently from a larger company, and same goes for complexity. And it is first, the primary tool that an insurance company is going to use is going to be a questionnaire, and it might be a relatively cursory questionnaire if it's a small company. If it's a larger company, it's going to be a longer questionnaire, and if it's a particularly large and complicated questionnaire, it might go beyond that. It might be a series of meetings and interviews with particular risk owners at the applicant, not just at that high level kind of risk management level, but maybe down to the owners of particular areas of risks in terms of facility managers or facilities people or cybersecurity teams and that sort of thing. So it is, it's an attempt by a company that's fairly sophisticated, probably from most insurance companies' perspective in IT related risks from a cyber perspective, to try to understand the risks posed by the applicant company and the way the controls they have in place to mitigate those risks. So it's a balance of those things. How big is the inherent risk? How big a target are they? How attractive are they to threat actors? And what have they done to mitigate that risk? Identify, well, I should say really understand it and mitigate the risk, because the first one is crucial to the second one.
Definitely.
And certainly, with the sort of thing we're talking about here, and as we've mentioned over the last 30 minutes or so, engaging a company, particularly if you have a specialized operational technology risk, engaging an expert in that area to help you identify and mitigate those risks is something that's going to definitely have an impact on that insurance underwriting process.
Very good. Dave, anything to add to answer the question we had here?
I originally came off mute to say that Tim is the expert and on this topic. So no, not much to add. I think summed it up really well, and it's an interesting landscape. I mean, I know, my experience or my exposure has been more like trying to consult on the topic of risk and help, working with insurance companies, and so they typically are proactive in trying to always update that risk profile and whatnot. So sometimes we make them the villain, but at the end of the day, they're just trying to manage risk, and yes, they're aiming to make a profit as well, but the same token, I think it's an important element in terms of an organization managing their risk, right?
Yeah, help them help
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say too, from an insurance perspective, that probably in a lot of insurance underwriters not particularly knowledgeable about or comfortable with operational technology risk. So they might know just enough about it to know that it's a little bit scary. And if they identify that there is an operational technology risk at a particular applicant, they may not go beyond that. They may know, okay, there's this scary risk here, but also realize they don't really understand it. And to the extent that the applicant can help them understand the risk, and particularly help them understand that they have considered and worked on and mitigated that risk, I think that could be a huge advantage.
Yeah, definitely. All right, but I want to make sure that we get the questions covered here because we are running out of time with 10 minutes to go. So next question here, and I'm pretty sure this one will be for you as well, Tim. What are some best practices for organizations in selecting the right cybersecurity insurance and operational warranties?
Yeah, and this will, no surprise, I think, be very consistent with what we've been talking about so far. I think that number one is to make sure you understand your risks. So, what kind of a company are you? Often, certain risks will be inherent in what you do. Depending on what your business is, a lawyer's office is going to have a very different sort of risk than a machine shop, and so understanding what you do, what your risks are, where your assets are, both IT and OT is a big kind of thing, particularly, on the IT side, what kind of information do you store? Do you have personal information? All that sort of thing. So really understanding your exposure, and I think partnering with a good intermediary, an agent or broker, in your quest to acquire cyber insurance, I think will be very important as well. A good intermediary is going to help you with that first step of kind of understanding your own risk and your assets and what needs to be protected in the first place. And then from there, looking at what the controls are that you have in place in order to do that sort of risk mitigation, risk assessment, to make sure that you've done what you can to mitigate your own risk, and that you're truly kind of using a cyber insurance for its intended purpose, which is to pick up that residual risk that is still remains once you've done what you should in order to understand it and mitigate your own risk. So that's kind of the process that I think an insured or an applicant can go through in order to prepare themselves for the cyber insurance process. And then it's going to be, again, working with your chosen intermediary, agent, or broker, which again is a very important part of this process, to reach out to the appropriate providers of insurance in the appropriate markets, so that you are getting offers and consideration from the kind of the leaders in your field that might be able to provide you that cyber risk insurance policy, that risk transfer instrument that you need.
Awesome, very good. And I see you unmuted yourself there, Dave.
I think those were the key points, and yeah, I was going to double up that the relationship with your broker intermediary is fundamental and can make a big difference.
Yeah,
Right?
I would
But
imagine that.
also yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, for sure. And the only thing I was going to add is, year over year, you'll start to see those trends. Like the risk profile will change, the questions formatting, the questions asked will change, obviously, right? But I think it's important to engage your practitioners, whether it's your security team, your asset owners, whoever your key stakeholders internally are, engage them in the process. Not just that they give you the answer to the question, but they see the effects and impact of the answers as well in some way, shape, or form. And like I think we've touched on, that performance warranty makes that very, very tangible, right? But with cyber insurance, it's much more nebulous for the boots on the ground, so to speak. But the more that you can be engaging them and having them collecting details and evidence and aligning with insurance. I've seen insurance actually as being, we talk regulation moves cybersecurity posture, but I would say that oftentimes there's a plateauing effect there, that insurance helps keep things moving. And we can grumble about it, sure, but But I think when you engage people, when you look at it, that this is effective risk management, and that is a hallmark of increasing your security maturity and your posture. Change the framing a bit, then I think much progress can be made at implementing effective security, not just compliance, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point. You know, when I was talking, I was speaking mostly from kind of the insurance buyer's perspective. Often that's the risk manager, somebody like that, somebody in that risk management role. But your point of making sure that that insurance buyer, whoever they might be, is in touch with kind of the owners of the specific risks that we talked about. So, you know, IT security team. Historically, that's been the big one when you're buying cyber insurance, is coordinating with your CIO and your CISO, your chief information security officer. But if you're in an organization where there is operational technology, where there are product lines, where there's a facility, it's also important to engage with those people that really know and understand the risk, not only to make sure that you're providing the right information to your insurance agent and broker and your potential insurance carrier partners, but also to make sure that it's part of your risk understanding process to make sure you know what risks you have and where you need to be protected.
And I can also imagine that there's some errors in translation, because if you're talking to people at the shop floor, like Dave said, insurance might be nebulous. So there's different terminologies and different thought processes about areas and how security and insurance might work.
Very true. Very true.
But all right. Well, with that, I'd like to go ahead and sort of close out this webinar. So thanks again very much, Dave. Thanks again, Tim. Before we finish things off completely here, I just really want to try and summarize some key takeaways here from your discussions and kind of boil it down to a couple of bullet points here. So what I took away from your really interesting discussions here was that warranties and cybersecurity insurance, they're not mutually exclusive, but they actually work together as sort of an integrated solution. So you can protect equipment and critical infrastructure against cyber threats, be it from the operational level or organizational level, tactical, strategic, however you want to put it. And then that our risk assessment from OTORIO and HSB warranties are really key in reducing risk, better understanding risk, and obtaining more comprehensive coverage from an insurance standpoint. That organizations generally should be careful in considering their cybersecurity needs and risks. So actually putting some thought into it to really select insurance and warranties that ensure they have adequate coverage. So really just not just evaluating what is the cost of doing nothing, we're actually putting some thought into it, almost like the engineering approach to things, continuously improving things because there is change. And then, of course, last but not least, that a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy should always be a mix of insurance and warranties, risk assessments, and being proactive, which kind of plays into what I just said with continuous improvement, just to keep an eye on risks, make sure that they're effectively being mitigated. But again, using insurance and warranties kind of hand in hand here to make sure that things are covered and going in the right direction. Would you all agree that that's a good way of summarizing our webinar here today?
Excellent summary, Shannon. Well done.
Yes.
Very
Sure.
good. All right. Well, thank you for that. With that, I want to thank our attendees here for taking the time to visit us. And special thanks, of course, goes out to Tim and Dave right here. So thanks again to HSB. Thanks again to OTORIO. Really interesting discussions here. And then I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.